Imagine discovering at 13 years old that the only reason why your mother didn't kill you at birth like she did to 6 of your siblings is because other people knew that she was pregnant and she didn't want to get caught. On April 12, 2014, a 13-year-old girl was in the garage of her house in Pleasant Grove, Utah, a small and sleepy town about 30 miles from Salt Lake City, helping her dad, Darren West, clean and throw away garbage. The man had just recently been released from a California prison, where he served 9 years on drug distribution charges. Having spent some time in a halfway house in Salt Lake City with a few other former inmates, he had just moved back to the house he used to share with his ex-wife Megan and their 3 daughters, Sawyer, JC, and Darian, aged 13 to 20. After he was jailed in 2006, his parents, who owned the property, had allowed Megan to keep living in the house. But when they found out she was cheating on him, they told her to move out, leaving the 3 daughters, the eldest of whom was 18 at the time, to live there with supervision from an aunt who moved in to help look after them. That day, her dad had asked Sawyer, as well as other family members, to help him declutter the garage that was still filled with stuff left by Megan and needed a proper cleanup. So the girl was opening up all the boxes to check what was they contained and throw away the stuff they didn't need. She'd been at it for a while when she came across a cardboard box that was sealed shut with black tape. Inside the box there was a plastic bag. Inside the bag, an object wrapped in a towel. When she unwrapped the package and saw what it contained, she froze in shock, before rushing to call her dad. Inside the towel, the girl had found what looked like the remains of a newborn child. When Darren saw what his daughter had found, he couldn't fathom how the baby could have ended up in that box in his garage, or whom baby it was for that matter, since he and his now ex-wife had only had 3 daughters and they all were alive and well. His first reaction was to call Megan to ask whether she knew something about it, before calling 911 to report the discovery. At the time, Megan was living with her new boyfriend in a mobile home park in West Valley City, in the Salt Lake City metropolitan area, where she'd moved about a year prior after having spent some time at her mother's house in the wake of her eviction from her home in Pleasant Grove. When she received a call from Darren asking if she knew about the baby, Megan candidly admitted that it was in fact her baby, but explained that it was stillborn when she delivered it at home in 2006, months after Darren had been imprisoned. Not knowing what to do, she decided to hide it in a box in the garage. As they were having this conversation, police arrived on the scene. After officers were informed of the situation, they called for backup to conduct a thorough search of the property, while investigators headed to West Valley City to pick up Megan and bring her to the police station to be interviewed. Once she was sat across the table from the investigator assigned to the case, she told him the same she told Darren, that the baby was stillborn, and since no one knew about the pregnancy, she'd made the decision to hide it. Things, however, took an even darker turn an hour into the interview, when officers on the scene called in to report the discovery of a second baby, also wrapped in a towel inside a box. At this point, Megan's story no longer seemed believable. Pressed by investigators, she finally admitted that, if they had kept looking, they would have found 8 or 9 bodies of babies she'd given birth to over the years. One of them was actually stillborn, while the other she had killed herself by means of strangulation and suffocation, right after they come to life, before hiding them in boxes so that no one would know. After having searched the house from top to bottom, police ended up only finding 6 bodies, one of which had a black elastic hair tie around its neck that Megan explained she'd used to be sure the baby was dead, plus the one discovered by Megan's daughter, and concluded that her talking about 8 or 9 was because she didn't remember exactly and was taking a ballpark guess. Having confessed to the killings, Megan was booked into the Utah County Jail, facing 6 counts of murder. The following day, a judge set her bond at $6 million, one for each baby. Despite the main suspect was already in custody, investigators were left with several questions that needed to be answered before going to trial, like who was the father of the babies and whether or not someone else knew what was going on. And most of all, why she did what she did, which seemed inexplicable, especially because Megan was known to people as being a loving mother to her 3 daughters, and overall as someone who really enjoyed spending time with children. Neighbors both in Pleasant Grove and West Valley City said they'd let her babysit their children many times, and she always came across as a very loving and caring person. Someone even pointed out that one of her elder daughters was currently pregnant, and Megan seemed really excited at the prospect of being a grandmother. Answers to these questions came in the form of more confessions by Megan, whom, having now been discovered, was eager to unburden herself of 18 years of guilt. She explained that after they'd been married for a couple years, she and her husband had gotten hooked on meth, and since then, her life has started spiraling downwards. Since at the time she already had 2 daughters, she was well aware of the costs associated with raising kids, and realized that if she had more, she would have no longer been able to afford their methamphetamine. Thus, in her mental state altered by drugs and chronic depression, she decided that her best option was to simply kill every single baby she had in the 10-year period from 1996 to 2006, when her husband was jailed. So every time she felt pregnant, she was careful to do everything she could to prevent people from noticing, wearing baggy clothes and avoiding interacting with neighbors. Then she gave birth at home, twice when other people were in the house, and immediately choked to death the newborn babies, and made sure the rooms were clean and the bodies packed away before anyone knew what was happening. It wasn't clear, not even to her at the time of her confession, why she never asked anyone for help, especially considering that a law was passed in Utah in 2001 that allows people who have a child but aren't prepared to care for it to drop the child off with no questions asked and no liability. "I cannot give a reasonable answer why I was capable of such a sick and heinous crime," she said. "I know I didn't feel strong enough to be a mother to those tiny babies, and in some way I wanted to help them avoid the terrible life I would have given them." According to her lawyer, her shyness and depression likely contributed to her being too scared to ask for help. The woman then said that the 6 babies she killed, as well as the one who was stillborn, were all Darren's, which was later confirmed by a DNA test. As for why she hadn't killed her 3 living daughters, Megan explained that the 2 eldest were born when she and her husband weren't yet suffering from drug addiction, while the youngest, who was conceived inside that 10-year period, was spared because some of her family members knew that she was pregnant. When she was kicked out of the house by her in-laws, she thought about moving the bodies, but couldn't figure out a way to do it without getting caught. These revelations shocked the people closest to her, who never would have thought that she was capable of committing such a horrible crime, considering how nice a person she was. Even more because none of the people who knew her had been aware of her pregnancies. Some of her neighbors in Pleasant Grove said that, over the years, they'd seen her weight fluctuate slightly. Others that in a few occasions they'd seen her sporting what might have looked like a baby bump, but Megan was very shy and never spoke about it. Also, their families weren't aware of the couple's issues with drugs. Megan's mother stated during the trial that growing up her daughter was a very quiet girl and had always kept to herself, never wanted to ask for help, rarely sharing personal details of her life with anyone. She grew even more secretive after she got pregnant in high school and moved out at age 18 to marry Darren. Megan's confession also raised questions on her husband's involvement, as it seemed unlikely that she could have carried 7 pregnancies full term without him ever noticing, since although he worked in the construction industry, he was home most nights and rarely away from his family. However, police eventually determined that the man wasn't aware of what was going on. He only found out when the first body was discovered and was devastated by it. In the end, Megan Huntsman pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder and, in April 2015, she was sentenced to 6 terms of 5 years to life in prison, 3 of which to be served consecutively and 3 concurrently. Without her cooperation, attorneys on both sides know that prosecutors wouldn't have had a case against her, because lacking any obvious signs of trauma on the bodies, forensic anthropologists wouldn't have been able to prove that the babies were born alive. At the trial, Megan's younger sister Jamie read the letters submitted by the 2 eldest of Megan's daughters in behalf of their mother, in which they described her as a loving parent. "Nobody could guess our mom would do anything like this," they wrote. "We remember the mom we know, the one that made dinner for us every night, cleaned our house, and loved not only her kids, but kids in general. No matter what anyone thinks you are, you're a good person. In her own statement, Jamie said, "Megan is not a monster, she's not evil. From what I understand, she was scared." Her youngest daughter wrote that she was shocked and heartbroken by her mother's crimes. This was the story of Megan Huntsman, a story that I myself find difficult to comprehend, let alone if I was one of the 3 daughters who so narrowly escaped death. Anyways, hope you found it interesting. If you have any opinion or suggestion, feel free to leave in the comments below, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching.